Mixtape with Scott. I'm your host, Scott Cunningham. The Mixtape with Scott is a podcast focused on listening to the stories of economists, scientists, and authors. I go back together with the guest in time to their youth, and then together we walk forward to the present through many of the important periods of their life as they became economists and did their scholarship. Because so many of the people I interview are PhD economists, the path that we walk inevitably involves school. School is very important to many people that have PhDs because we spent a huge chunk of our young life in school. But sometimes it covers more than just school. And this week's podcast is one of those. Before I introduce my guest this week, I'd like to read a few lines from Sue Johnson's book, Hold Me Tight, 7 Conversations for a Lifetime of Love. We use stories to make sense of our lives. We use stories as models to guide us into the future. We shape stories, stories shape us. This is the story, this interview here is the story, or it's at least a selected version of a man's story named Miles Kimball. Miles Kimball is a distinguished professor of economics at the University of Colorado at Boulder, PhD from Harvard, full professor at Michigan, before he came to UC Boulder. He's a true Renaissance man. I think that comes across in the interview. His interests and his scholarship range from topics like macroeconomics, survey response, beliefs and perceptions, and much, much more. But in this interview, we learn so much about Miles's life, even outside of those topics, particularly his life as a Mormon, devout Mormon from a devout Mormon, a fairly famous Mormon family. His grandfather was the 12th president of the Church of Latter-day Saints, which is, I asked him, is that kind of like being the Pope for the Mormon church? And I think he said it was kind of like that. Then he turned atheist, and he made many other turns in his life into where he is now, which is someone with a deep abiding passion to help economists in their own journeys of personal growth. Harvard trained, like I said. It's a remarkable journey to listen to, and I just thoroughly enjoyed our time together. This is by far the longest interview I've done, though. It's 2.5 hours. For me, the interview flew by, as I find Miles to be a deeply intelligent, stimulating, thought-provoking, compassionate, and kind man. I hope you do too, but it is a long interview. I am your host again, Scott Cunningham. Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe and tell other people about the podcast. I hope you enjoy it. All right, so it's my pleasure to have on the podcast, the first podcast of 2023 that I'm doing, a person that I've gotten to be actual friends with over the last, I guess, year or maybe even the last 2 years, Miles Kimball. Miles, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Can you, for the sake of the listener, tell us your name and your title?
Yeah, so I'm Miles Spencer Kimball. So I actually make a point often of saying my full name because it says the connection to my grandfather, who was named Spencer. But I was 29 years at the University of Michigan, which was plenty of time for me to be emeritus professor of economics there. And I'm also emeritus at the Survey Research Center at the University of Michigan. And then here I am at the University of Colorado Boulder. And there I'm Eugene D. Eaton Professor of Economics. Anyway, there's somebody died and made me named chair, literally.
Yeah.
And the family wasn't too happy about it. They wanted the money. They didn't want the money to go to somebody like me. But
right.
At any rate, somebody died and made me named chair here at the University of Colorado Boulder. And I also am I can't even remember exactly the title, but I have an affiliation with the Institute for Behavioral Genetics. So I do a little work on social science genetics that's been about assortative mating. So I actually,
oh wow.
I mean, one thing about me is I have very, very broad interests. So
Yeah.
I do research on a wide variety of different things. On REPEC, that's where I rank the highest, is breadth of citations across fields, which is kind of a reflection of having broad interests.
Yeah. 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 I was going to talk about that. You seem like a real Renaissance man. That's actually what I was wanting to do is kind of go back in time a little bit and learn a little bit about what your upbringing was like. What did your mom and dad do for a living, and where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. So was there until about age 13,
Hmm.
and I was born as a baby in Utah, but that was only because my mom went to be with her mom around the time of the birth. It's not like my family lived there at the time, and so I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. It's a college town. It's also the capital of
Hmm.
Wisconsin, so it has some interesting things there. But I lived in a wonderful area of the city called Nakoma that was near the Arboretum. So
Hmm.
uh, lot of interesting places, a lot of hills. Back then, we were free range children. I
Yeah.
mean, I would be on my bike roaming all over. I'm a fan of this free range children
Yeah.
movement. I think we're overprotective of
Yeah.
kids now in the physical world, and I mean I agree with Jonathan Haidt. We're overprotective of kids in the physical world and underprotective of them in the online world. I mean,
Yeah.
you should
Totally.
not be having 13-year-olds on Facebook. It's
Hmm.
especially not 13-year-old girls. It's very bad for their psyches.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's basically just Jonathan Haidt's argument. I'm just agreeing with him, but he's
Right.
the one who's made the case.
Yeah. Yeah. I was also free range and just rode my bike everywhere, and it's something that you can do in these smaller towns. I grew up in Mississippi, and it just my whole life was just riding my bike to the library or riding my bike just everywhere. It was wonderful.
I mean,
um
of course, the downside of Madison, Wisconsin is it was bitter cold in the winter.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, yeah,
it
that's
had a
right.
decent amount of humidity too. So we're not just talking about low temperature, but you've
Yeah,
got serious humidity.
right. What was your dad Were your parents connected to the university?
So my dad was a law professor. So I have a lot of
Oh.
lawyers in my family. So um, I have I have many interesting uncles and aunts, but my dad's oldest brother was named Spencer Levan Kimball, and he was at one point the head of the American Bar Foundation.
Mm.
He did insurance law and helped craft insurance law for I think it was for Wisconsin, but anyway, that had influence on insurance law in other states.
Mm.
So my uncle was a lawyer. My uncle was a law professor. My dad was a law professor. My brother is a tax lawyer. He was
Mm.
a law professor at Boston University briefly, but you know, publisher Parrish was not very fun because he agonized over writing papers, and so being in practice suited him better.
Dude,
But
it better.
he's a relatively high flight tax lawyer.
Mm.
Um,
Was that
and
something that
my
you thought you might do?
math law degree. Hmm?
Did you ever think that you might do law?
Uh, not No. I mean, I have a long history of different things I thought I'd be. But before I go there, let me say I do have lawyer in me. One of the most fun one of the most fun projects I'm doing now is a paper on negative interest rate law, and I think
Mm.
it's going to take time because at this point, the West Virginia versus EPA, where the Supreme Court is said the EPA was overstepping its bounds. Administrative law at the constitutional level is really in flux right now. So I think we'll probably delay that negative interest rate law piece until we know how administrative law has settled down a little bit more. The Supreme Court hasn't said what administrative agencies are allowed to do yet. They other than what they've been doing already. In terms of if an administrative agency does anything new, when are they allowed to do something new, and when are they not?
Right.
And I think so. Anyway, but that's fun for me because I've got law by osmosis. In terms of careers, when I was a kid, I mean, I've been all over the place. When I was a kid, I read a book on paleontology and went around saying I wanted to be a paleontologist. And then a little bit later on, I was saying I wanted to be a physicist. And I was really good at math. So I guess I'm still very proud of this. But I in my senior year of high school, I was 9th in the USA Math Olympiad.
Wow.
And that so I was good at math, and it wasn't, I mean, this was without the kind of support you'd get if you, well, Stuyvesant is an elite high school in New York City, for example, that had a lot of support for people who were kids who were really good at math. But being in Provo, Utah, I might as well have been in the wilderness, although I had very supportive teachers. They'd be supportive in the sense of, okay, you can sit in the back of the class and study math on your own.
Right. Wait, so you leave Madison at 13 and go to Provo?
Yeah, at 13, and then we went to Provo. So my dad was my dad was a law professor at the University of Wisconsin, but then he was in the founding faculty of Brigham Young University, and which immediately became quite a good law school. The thing you've got to understand is there's a sense of, in the Mormon Church, which I grew up in, and my dad was a believer till he died. There's this tradition that everybody in the church contributes in some position, whether it's Sunday school teacher or working the library that they have for materials or and you could go on and on, but there's this lay participation in Mormonism, so much so that at the local level there's not as big a distinction between, there's not this, it's like everybody, all the men are ordained as priests. Now, Mormonism is a religion in which patriarchy is a good word. So, you have people saying, oh, the awful patriarchy. In Mormonism, it's like, the patriarchy, wonderful. So patriarch is a very positive word in Mormonism. So women don't get the priesthood, and there's a big story to be told about that. But
have they never? Is there no offshoots? Were any of the offshoots ever considered women getting the priesthood? Because I know there was like little branches off at different points, right?
The offshoots tend to be, many of the offshoots tend to be more conservative than the church. So I think it's the schismatic tendency is much stronger for people who are more conservative. People who are more liberal, they just leave.
That's a good point.
When I left Mormonism, I'm a Unitarian Universalist officially. I never officially left Mormonism. I'm still on the books there, but I considered signing the book at the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Ann Arbor as leaving Mormonism, even though I'm still on Mormonism's books. But it's Mormonism was a big part in my in my growing up. I mean, there's a lot to say about that, but my grandfather was the head of the Mormon Church in the whole world. In trying to think of the dates, but when I was a teenager, he was the head of the Mormon Church, and he and he was important in the history of the Mormon Church because he, as head of the Mormon Church, he's the one who made it so that the Mormon Church uh, ordained blacks as priests as well as everyone else. And so there had been a bar on blacks getting the priesthood, with the exception of a few in the very early days of Mormonism. They hadn't knowingly ordained blacks to the priesthood for 100 years. Well, must be more than that, but like 100 years and or more. And my grandfather changed that, and he did that as a true believer. So he was. I mean, I knew my grandfather relatively well. I mean, he was a very busy man. So but we moved to Provo, Utah when I was 13, and that's pretty close to where my grandfather worked in Salt Lake City. So
Wait, so how old were you when he became? How old were you when he became president?
I think I was 13. I think I was 13.
I mean,
That's
so for the people that are listening,
or 14 maybe.
To be the president of, he was the 12th president of the Mormon Church. It's like your grandfather, kind of conceptually might have been like the Pope, or he had that level.
Exactly. Absolutely. I mean, it's like, on the one hand, it's a much smaller church than the Catholic Church. So in that sense, he, just because of the size of the church, he wasn't like the Pope. But in terms of theory, he was much more than the Pope, because the prophet of the Mormon Church, the president of the Mormon Church, the theology is that the president of the church can receive revelation from God that says something totally new. And the Pope is only supposed to interpret existing doctrine. Right. Now, the Pope can make authoritative interpretations. Right. And in practical sense, some of them can be pretty new, but if you think of an invocation of infallibility, the biggest thing is like saying that Mary was born without original sin. I mean, that's about the biggest thing that a Pope has said. I infallibly say that something about doctrine, whereas the head of the Mormon Church could introduce dramatically different doctrine. Now,
did your grandfather do that?
This was a pretty big.
Did your grandfather do that?
This is the biggest thing, giving blacks the priesthood. Now, I think the other interesting part of that is my dad was my grandfather's biographer. So the first did 2 biographies. The first one with my cousin Andrew Kimball, but my dad's Edward Kimball, and he's my dad, Edward L. Kimball, is on Wikipedia too. So, but he was wrote 2 biographies of my grandfather. My dad made an effort to make it a warts and all biography, in the sense of not a hagiography, to say kind of things that might sound a little bad. Now, I mean, my grandfather was a very well-behaved guy, so there weren't really bad things, except for political things. I mean, nowadays people look back and say, "Oh, he wasn't good on gay rights," which is true. But he was president of the church in, let's say, 70. I don't know exactly, but I'm guessing like 74 to 85. Right. So by modern standards, he wasn't good on gay rights at all. Yeah. But at that time, the big, but he did bring blacks into, in some sense, full statutory equality in the Mormon Church. I mean, there's kind of de facto equality of blacks, which is a struggle everywhere in society. But in terms of statutory equality within the Mormon Church, he accomplished that, and that's pretty good for the
Well,
70.
did it feel differently when he became president? Like, did you feel like your social network treated you differently, or like,
Yes. So I got constant. I don't want to exaggerate it, but I got constant extra warm fuzzies, shall we say, from people because my grandfather was the president of the church. I mean, it's like, I mean, it's so hard, but I mean, I would love to do something good enough in the world that people would have warm fuzzies for my grandchildren. That's
right?
really pretty hard to
Yeah,
do
sure.
something big enough that anybody would even think of connecting your grandchildren to
Yeah,
you and
sure.
treat your grandchildren a little bit
That
better. But
that's
he was
that's
that big. My grandfather was that big that people treated me a little better because maybe even a medium amount better
uh
because of the good that he'd done in their view.
well, so when did this, you ultimately, kind of for the listener, you ultimately end up leaving? You mentioned it, you're in the Unitarian Universalist Church now, but this process of leaving, I'm curious, when did it start? And well, I'll first just ask, when did it start, and why did it happen?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great story, Liz. Let me tell. But first, let me tell you about my current status. So, I'm one thing about the Unitarian Universalist churches. They didn't ever tell me I had to show up every Sunday, and so my attendance record is
It's
pretty
pretty
low.
abysmal.
However, I am part of a men's group that at the Unitarian Universalist Ann Arbor group. And in it, they started a bunch of men's group every year. They'd start a men's group, which is, I think, a wonderful thing. And when I moved to Colorado, I wasn't able to do it for a while, but then the pandemic made everybody do things on Zoom. So I'm back regularly, but getting together with those folks, which reminds me, I got to lead the discussion this month. I gotta,
Yeah,
that's
prep.
actually pretty soon. Oh, but anyway, I'll good thing to be reminded of that. But I'm in terms of beliefs. What I say this clearly on my blog. I'm a non-supernaturalist, and if
Right,
somebody asks me if I believe in God, I say I believe in God as much as a non-supernaturalist can. So I
right.
don't believe in anything supernatural, and I even have a blog post about what is supernatural, and that my answer there was I'm basically making the physicists the arbiter of what's
Mm,
supernatural or not.
mm. Oh,
And
interesting.
so, but if you think about how do you define supernatural, it's actually not a super easy question. But I don't believe in the supernatural, but I have a very positive attitude towards religion. I think
Yeah.
religion is very helpful, and in particular, well, I have all my when I was in Michigan, every year I get invited up to give a sermon at the community Unitarian Universalists of Brighton, which is pretty close to Ann Arbor. And
Mm,
so those are all up online. I've got videos of many of them, but the texts are all there on my blog, and so you can see a lot of these things. But one of the simple views I have is religion kind of deals with the everything else category in our
mm,
our existence. So everything, it's a little bit like natural philosophy. Natural philosophy was what they called everything they hadn't figured out yet.
yeah.
When they figured out physics, they called it physics. When they figured out chemistry, they called it chemistry. When they figured out psychology, they called it psychology, and everything they hadn't figured out yet, they called natural philosophy. Well, religion is like that on on a bit more practical side. Well, not entirely practical, but on not exactly the scientific side, but in terms of our existence as human beings, the it's like all the stuff when we figure something out, it's like, okay, we've got psychotherapy here,
Right.
but all the stuff we haven't figured out yet, we throw
Mm,
into this category of religion. And I think that's a lot of
mm.
important stuff,
Yeah.
the stuff
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
haven't figured out. And that doesn't mean there's a supernatural,
Right.
but without believing in a supernatural, the category of things we haven't figured out very well yet is a super important
Right.
mongrel category.
Right. Right.
And that's what religion tries to deal with, sometimes better, sometimes worse.
Yeah, that's really nuanced. I mean, when because it's not. I actually haven't. It's almost like you're kind of make this you saying it as someone who doesn't believe in the supernaturalist, but gives, like uses the physicist to arbiter what it would be to not be supernaturalist. It's almost like you're sort of saying, well, it's possible something in religion could kind of get sorted into this real category. I would imagine then the break from the LDS church is like not as it could at least have been not as antagonistic as it might have been. But is that
Oh, yeah, no, I was not. I don't think it was particularly antagonistic for me at all. So you do have a lot of people who leave Mormonism who leave with a lot of rancor,
yeah.
and I mean, so there's a lot to say about that. First of all, the bit of advice is simple. So for people who really believe in Mormonism, leaving Mormonism or coming to not believe it or otherwise leaving it, you got to remember, for people who believe, Mormonism is like a third parent. And so
Uh-huh.
leaving Mormonism is like becoming estranged from your third parent.
Mm,
And you should be under the care of a psychotherapist when you leave Mormonism, for the
mm,
same reason that if your parent betrayed you, you ought to be under psychological care.
yeah. Right. Right. Mm,
Now, and so let me say more about Mormonism. So I mean, look, my dad was a was a remarkable guy. He wasn't perfect by any means, and but I won't go into that. But he was, I mean, he was pretty good. And the remarkable thing about him is he had a very positive view of the universe, like the universe was a very friendly place. And he had a very positive view of other people. I mean, so he was a Mormon liberal, and he was not a conservative Mormon. I mean, he was a Mormon liberal, but on the other hand, he would always give interpret people as favorably as possible, including church leaders.
mm,
Um, and so I grew up with that. So my dad had this very positive view of things, and I grew up with Mormon liberal publications uh, like Sunstone and Dialogue. They're on the shelf in in the dining room, and it was and so I got the idea. Oh yeah, there are these questions about Mormonism, but they have answers because I mean, in fact, whatever the Mormon church leaders thought, those um, certainly in that period of time, the Mormon liberal publications were actually very supportive of the church, and they would
yeah.
kind of solve some of the questions and problems that were there. But I got a lot of good things from Mormonism. I mean, I could say many things. Let me try to think of some most important. But one of the main things was the emphasis on truth, and
Mm,
that's eventually where I why I left Mormonism. But I left Mormonism because of a value that Mormonism instilled in me, and the value of truth. I
yeah.
mean, that still I feel that viscerally, and in one area, and one you're a big proponent of is statistical rectitude too. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but um, but Mormon church leaders lie in
Yeah.
their view to protect the institution in their view. But the way we were taught in Mormon Sunday school and so on, there wasn't leeway to lie. There was not leeway to lie. This idea that you could lie to protect the church. No, no, no. You tell the truth. That's what I was taught in Mormonism. And that part, and so it's like two conflicting parts of Mormonism. The part that says truth is one of the highest values. And I don't know if everybody would buy this, but in my mind, the growing up, they would say, people would say the church is true, meaning the Mormon church is true.
And
when I left Mormonism, I thought of that in terms of, that's a great statement because it says that truth judges Mormonism. That actually goes back to Plato had that dialogue of Euthyphro, where there's the question of, is something just because the gods say so, or can the gods be judged by justice too?
Right.
So the Mormon church is can be judged by truth. And so anyway, I mean, I got that value of truth from Mormonism. I got one basic thing is Mormonism talks about the importance of family, which and in a very particular sense, I mean, it was more specific than that. The Mormon church would talk a lot about the danger of men getting so involved with their careers that they neglected family. And criticizing that. And I mean, I could have been much worse than I was on that score, let's put it that way, without having that clear marker. I mean, I spent a lot of time on my career and maybe gave at many points short shrift to my family, but I think less so than if I hadn't had that as a clear warning. So that's another good thing I got. I got from Mormonism. And those are some of the big ones. Oh, and the last one I want to say is Mormonism, as I grew up in it. Now, I grew up in a very intellectual Mormon family, but I grew up with it like with a very pro-intellectual version of Mormonism. I'm not saying there isn't an anti-intellectual version of Mormonism too, but I grew up with a very pro-intellectual version of Mormonism. And there were just so many interesting ideas because Mormonism has not, because of this idea of continuing revelation, of modern revelation, you have not just the Bible, but you've got the Book of Mormon, you've got the Doctrine and Covenants, you've got all the things that leaders of the church have said. You've got the idea that you can get, revelation from God yourself, individually, and so there are all these things written and all these things to think about and to try to figure out, and it's just fascinating. I mean, including the Mormonism was founded in 1830. So this was after a significant chunk of the scientific revolution. Now, unfortunately, it was before the Darwinian revolution. And so Mormonism is not as bad as many evangelical churches about Darwinism. But overall, it's got a mildly negative attitude towards Mormonism, towards Darwinism, which is too bad, because I think the founder of Mormonism, for all his faults, if he had lived to see the Darwinian revolution, he would have wound it into Mormonism. I mean, maybe we'd be in trouble now because a specific view on Darwinism would have gotten put into Mormon doctrine, but Darwinism would have been included somehow, or so all the science up till the first half of the 19th century, Mormonism is down with it, which is a very good strength of Mormonism.
That's interesting.
And that's made Mormonism it even has a somewhat science fiction theology. that God comes from another world, for example, is a part of Mormon doctrine. And the idea that we can, each of eternal progression, that we can become gods and create worlds. So you can see the science fiction resonances, and those science fiction resonances actually matter because Mormons have written a lot of great science fiction.
Right. Yeah.
It's
What's
not,
the Ender's Game? Yeah.
and yeah, Orson Scott Card is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, he's a marvelous tip of the iceberg, but there are an awful lot of Mormon science fiction authors. Brandon Sanderson is one of the other famous ones, but a more obscure one is David Wolverton, who's written some nice books. I mean, you could go on and on with Mormon science fiction authors, but Mormonism was had this idea of the plurality of worlds, and so just this idea of an expansive universe with all kinds of interesting things out there. And of course, at that time, I did believe in supernatural, which was another. I mean, I was a true believer in Mormonism. I was a true believer in Mormonism, and for up until my mid-30s, I think.
As a professor?
Absolutely.
Oh, you leave the Mormon church at Michigan.
Oh no, I was a true believer till at least the age of 35. I left the church when I was 39, and things were getting to fray. Obviously, things were getting to fray somewhat before then, but no, I was a full-scale believer. I mean, so I was arguing religion with my college classmates at Harvard. I went on a Mormon mission. I spent 2 years in Japan. It was called the Tokyo North Mission. So I was in Tokyo some of that time, and sometimes in the suburbs. And so I spoke Japanese passively at the time. Could still say a few sentences. And then I came back, and I was an elders quorum president. That won't mean anything to non-Mormons, but I was I was a believer. I taught Sunday school for many years, and taught priesthood meeting. And in fact, the moment, I mean, I was even, it might be a little shocking, but I was even teaching lessons after I was no longer a believer. And I kind of got, at some point, that's what I actually, what I fully quit going to church was when they said I couldn't teach lessons. And it's very interesting how I did it. It was no problem. So they wanted us to take a sermon of a Mormon church leader and talk on it. And so all I do was I just cross out everything I disagreed with, and then there was about a third of it left, and I just talk about that third, and that worked perfectly well. And you might have thought, oh, those are just kind of truisms, but there's a lot of depth to truisms.
So that sounds like how your dad kind of was. I mean, that's kind of that optimist, looking for the parts that you can endorse almost. That kind of, that seems like a very positive approach.
I still endorse a lot of Mormonism. I think in particular, when you talk about social policy and reforming our society, I think the Mormon Church has a lot of wonderful wisdom in it about, I mean, it has its own welfare program. And when people think of Mormons being conservative and being against welfare programs, they've got to realize the Mormon Church has its own welfare programs. And so the Mormon Church was saying, we're not comfortable with the government doing it. We are comfortable with, we are absolutely comfortable with taking care of the poor. We should be taking care of the poor, but we're worried that the government will mangle it. And so it's not it's not this, and it's, and in fact, I mean, one of the basic things that Mormon, I mean, I've written about this on my blog, you know, how I have one on how Mormon America avoided many of the bad fate, much of the bad fate of white conservative America, and there, you take care of everybody in
Right.
the congregation. I mean,
Well,
even, I mean, really, I mean, you try to take care of everybody, and it's not just, I mean, and the philosophy is, it's not about, I mean, you do hand people money when that's necessary, but it's not, mainly not about handing people money. It's about helping them. It's about talking to them, helping them figure things out,
right.
and you hand them money when need be, and the church has had its own commodity distribution system so that they could hand people food when they needed food and take care of other things. And but it's like nobody's ignored. It's
Right.
like you have people who are assigned to be responsible for the most down and out people in the congregation, and it's, I mean, there's remarkable wisdom in Mormonism
Yeah.
about alternative ways we could organize society.
Right. 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 Well, so one of the things I think is interesting about, there's two things I think are so fascinating about you. One is this complete, like I said, you're this Renaissance man. You have so many interests. I'm sure people have said that to you. It's not just like dabbling either. It's not, you go so deep on so many different topics. And we could talk for a long time about that, but I wanted to talk about one, how, we met because of this thing called a pod that you ran a couple of years ago. And before we get into that, I was just kind of curious, how long have you been interested in personal growth? And what exactly does that phrase personal growth even mean to you? We could even start there.
Hey, hey, can I take a little bio break? I hope you were
Yeah,
able to edit things enough to
yeah, I
deal
can
with
do.
that. So
Yeah,
I'll be right back.
yeah. So how long have you been? When did that start? Is that a Mormon? Would you say that Mormonism is the beginning of your interest in personal growth, or and first of all, what does it
That's
mean
it.
to you? What does that
Well, that's
phrase mean?
interesting. I mean, I think um, I hadn't thought about it as it's fully coming from Mormonism. I think it's a family thing too, but
Mm,
certainly it's there in Mormonism because you you go to church every Sunday, and you get people talking about trying to be better. One of the cool things about Mormonism, I said that it has a lot of lay participation. It depends on how you
mm,
want to characterize it. You know, all the men are ordained priests, so with few exceptions, and then the women are also taking on roles in running the church, and and you would have people rotate in the pulpit. So the bishop is a head of a Mormon congregation, not like in the Catholic Church where they're the head of many congregations. A bishop is the head of just one congregation, but the bishop only occasionally. The bishop might talk like once a month or something, but every week you'd have 3 or 4 or 5 members of the congregation give a talk, and so it's just the members of the congregation talking to one another about, well, trying to be good. I mean, there's some amount of trying to keep the, how do you do a good job as a member of the institution of the church. But I think actually the majority of the talks would be about trying to be good,
right.
and and people would regularly draw on things that seemed like wise advice that was outside that was not directly from the scriptures, from the Mormon scriptures or anything. I mean, the Bible is a Mormon scripture, and you'd have other things in addition. So there certainly was a personal growth aspect to Mormonism, and the idea of eternal progression was explicitly about that. I should say about eternal progression that the Mormon Church has backed off from that a little bit. I'm not sure of the current status of that, but when I was growing up, it was very clear that if you were very, very good, you could become a god in the hereafter. And
interesting.
So I don't know. I mean, that's the sort of doctrine that I think has been backed away from to some degree, and I'm not sure of the current state of play there. But there was no question when I was growing up that was a clear doctrine. There was it was often said something like, as man is, God once was; as God is, man may become.
Right.
And I would argue, with at college, to my fellow students, I would argue with the atheists. I would argue that there was such a thing as truth, and it wasn't all just relative. So lots didn't get very far with that, but that was the argument. And then with the Christian but non-Mormon fellow students, I'd be down that sort of thing. I'd argue, well, which is more powerful, a God who can make us become gods, or a God who can't? Things like that. But anyway, so eternal progression. But my mother had self-help books lying around the house, and actually, when it came time for my parents never gave me the birds and the bee talks. My mother just left these books about sex lying around the house,
hoping you'd find them,
without pointing us to them. They were just left lying around. But anyway, I mean, like I think I read like The Female Eunuch was one of them, and there was I can't remember. Anyway, but so my mother was a double major, I think, in sociology and psychology. She always had self-help books. But the thing that I regularly say, so now, as Scott alluded to, one of the things I'm trying to do for economics as a discipline, and since I think economics and economists are important in the world as a body, take all the economists in the world. That's a lever you can move the world with.
Right.
If you can convince all the economists in the world of something, it'll have an effect, for good or ill. If you convince them of something that's false, that could have a bad effect. So I'm one of the few economists in the world who's a certified life coach, and that came about because my daughter became a life coach and got my wife Gail and me interested in it. So my daughter Diana became a life coach, and it's very cool training.
What's a life coach for those that don't know? How is it different from a therapist?
Yeah, so I was trained by what's now called the Coactive Training Institute. So in this, if you do this, it's a very client-centered approach. So first of all, it's not it's you I mean, there's a lot of things you do, but a lot of it is you're kind of asking people powerful questions that help them think about their life. And there's even a technical definition of a powerful question. A powerful question is one that has at least like 25 different possible answers, and it's not a yes/no question. It's like, so it's sort of opening things up. and so there, with the way I got trained as a coactive coach, there are kind of three modes. One is they call it fulfillment coaching, but it's basically identifying somebody's values, the things, their objective function, identifying their objective function, and then trying to you know asking questions to help them think about how they're, how they can, what they want to do in relation to their objective function.
Yeah.
And so that's good sound economics in my view. Then another mode of
Because
coaching,
some people can't articulate. Is that sort of saying that some people really, that what their objective function is, they either don't know what it is, or they might even be wrong about it? I mean,
the marginal product of guided introspection on understanding your own objective function is huge. And so economic models that act like knowing your own deep objective function is easy,
right,
are base.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's and it's well, I mean, so in my academic work,
real quick, Miles, let me ask you a question. So clearly people think they know their objective function and they must have some objective, but you're saying that's different, using the jargon of economics. That might be different from your true underlying values. And so what does it look like, in your opinion?
Well, I think I wouldn't, I don't think I quite, here's how I would describe it. So I wouldn't describe it quite the way where you were going. So you clearly know a lot of things that you want. And life will throw up plenty of obstacles where you can't get what you want, that provide an opportunity to kind of understand better what you want. And so in particular, when you can't get what you want in this most straightforward way, which happens to us all the time, when you can't get what you want by the strategy you were already pursuing, then the question arises, you can try to strategize, how can I make that happen after all? Maybe I just need to try harder or keep pushing in the same direction. But another question is, wait a minute, is there a broader class of things that answer to what I want? That, I've been going after A, but is it, in some sense, I'd be happy with A, B, C, D, or E. And you can describe the category of A, B, C, D, or E as some deeper desire. But what else would I like? The fact that I've been working for A, I got blocked in trying to get A, I've been working towards it, and I can't seem to get it. What does that say about some broader category of things that I might want? That's the kind of thing that I mean by what are your values? That the deeper your understanding of your objective function, the more alternative strategies you have in the possibility set. So if you think that only A can make you happy, okay, there are different strategies for trying to get A. I mean, it's like,
how do you see this playing out in the life of a typical professor of economics? I'm curious. Like, where?
I think professors of economics, I talk about this on my blog. You're fighting not only your own your own narrowness in your view of your own deeper objective function, you're fighting the culture of the discipline too. So So my shorthand for this is you probably went into economics because you wanted to deeply understand the world, or you wanted to make the world a better place, or you wanted some kind of deep intellectual satisfaction.
Right.
And then by the time you get fully socialized and you're, let's say, 40 years old as an economist, it can happen earlier than that. You think that what you're supposed to do and your goal becomes that you think about all the time as, I need to publish papers in top journals.
Right.
And my claim is, if you care about publishing papers in top journals at all, which you reasonably can, it should be as a means to an end. It should be as a means towards making the world a better place. It should be as a means towards you understanding the world better. It should be a means towards other people understanding the world better. There has to be some higher goal than publishing papers in top journals, or you will find things a little bit hollow.
Right.
And so I realize that's a different statement than just, I mean,
what do you think?
A minute ago, talking about getting frustrated because you have trouble publishing papers in top
what
journals.
Do you think
but
is the? Well, let me ask you this:
might be a little hollow.
What is some other? What is the? You said the culture of the profession. What do you think are some other common statements or worldviews that the profession puts on publishing in top journals that people maybe don't realize, because nobody actually outrightly says anything. You can just sort of, culture just kind of naturally evolves as an equilibrium. So I was just curious, you said if you want to publish in top journals, it should be a means to a larger end. What are some other ways that people, that you might be battling against in the profession by saying that? What's a different message?
Oh, well, I mean, what's an alternative to that as the view of your be all and end all? Well, I mean, I think it's kind of the usual things. I mean, what do you want to have happen for the world? What do you want to have happen for yourself? You want to have happen for your students? I mean, what would a good world look like? And it's there's no harm. And so here's actually, it's related to the way I think of introductions to economics papers. So you start with something really grand and say, okay, here's some really big thing we're after. Okay, and in order to get that, we need to figure out this. And in order to figure out that, we need to figure out this. And in order to do this, I've got this strategy of doing this bit of research, and I'm going to do it on this data. So it's like you start from the really big stuff, and those are your, that's like your North Star and your planets and moon and everything. You're guiding yourself by the stars, but then you want to be humble enough to be able to do a little tiny piece in moving progress forward. I mean, it doesn't help to be grandiose to be so grandiose that you're unwilling to do something small. I mean, you say, here's the big thing I want to contribute to, and then what's the biggest thing that I personally am capable of doing, or that I'm capable of putting together a team to do. I mean, so you want to be humble enough to contribute at whatever level you're capable of contributing, and don't despise things that are small contributions to a much bigger thing. But you want to guide yourself by the big things, and it's one time I gave I haven't given many invited lectures in my life, but I gave one at Colorado College, and so was was there talking to people, and I thought, wow, at a liberal arts college, which I've never spent a lot of time at, they get to think big thoughts. They,
Right.
they don't seem quite as obsessed by just publishing papers. On the other hand, I've got to say, I mean, there are many economists who are way higher ranked than I am in the profession. Hundreds by the Repec metric, and it's and I know many of them, and a lot of them are workaholics.
Right.
The economists who are better known, and that's not to say anything against their work,
Right.
but in terms of the life experience of the top economists, a lot of them are running to publish enough papers so that they don't feel bad about themselves.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that's true of all of them. I mean, there's certainly some who seem to truly enjoy their lives. I mean, I think of, I mean, what do I know? I only kind of know the outsides of things, but I think of John Kimball as somebody who seems like quite a happy, well-balanced economist.
Mm.
And I don't know him super well, but I know him as well as you'd know most other most other economists who aren't your colleague, and he seems like a happy, well-balanced person, and
Right.
so than many other economists seem to me.
Yeah. So back to life coaching. So you ended up so part of what life coaching was this trying to understand what your core values are, and it's not necessarily about mental health. Then it's not like you come in.
Yeah, so it's not the thing about, okay, how does it compare to psychotherapy? So it's not, first of all, it's not Freudian at all, not
Mhm.
even a little bit. And so if you think of classic Freudian therapy, it's not at all like that. The thing about life coaching, on the other hand, the thing about life coaching is it's so powerful and it works so well that I mean, by whatever name, it's so powerful and it works so well that the psychologists have noticed, and the types of psychology that are the best documented to work by randomized controlled trials, those have some affinity, that those are somewhat similar to life coaching. But the thing about life coaching is it's not at all for people who are messed up. In fact, I've got to say, the kind of training I have, it's useless for helping people who have serious problems. I mean, I've tried, I mean, maybe unwisely, I think I tried once with life coaching of somebody who was depressed. It didn't work very well.
Yeah.
I've tried to work with some folks who had bipolar, and if it's well treated, somebody can be bipolar, and all these things can work really well. But if somebody has bipolar that's not well treated,
Yeah.
and that's often the luck of the draw, whether the medications work well for them. So,
Right.
but if somehow the medications don't work for them, the life coaching is kind of worthless. So I'm not saying totally worthless, but it's not designed for people who are in serious trouble. That takes another whole level of expertise, but it's amazingly powerful for people who, here's the thing. Here's the thing, and I'll say more about this, but I've talked to many people. I've talked to hundreds of people in enough depth to know that essentially everyone is carrying some major burden in their life.
Yeah.
That's pretty much universal.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, if you can identify one person who's about you know, who's gotten to middle age. I mean, it's a little different if somebody's really young, maybe they haven't hit anything really bad yet. But if you can identify anyone who's 35 years or older who hasn't had some major really tough thing in their life,
Yeah.
that's remarkable that you can even identify one person
Right.
in that
Right.
category.
Yeah.
So
It's
so
quite the lottery.
so you can, I mean, there are people who have psychological disorders that life coaching is not capable of dealing with. But if you take people like most of us, I mean, who are functioning pretty well in society, who are in many ways pretty well put together, and you have to be reasonably well put together to, say, get a PhD in economics.
Mhm.
And if you don't have some other fairly clear psychological disorder, then life coaching can be immensely helpful.
Yeah.
And it can be immensely helpful um, even if you're carrying and as especially if you're like almost every other human being and you do carry some significant burden.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and so it's like the normal run of the typical run of humanity. It's like the life coaching is really helpful. Let me tell you the other modes of life coaching. So there's this identification of your objective function. Another mode is just what I call perspective work, but you can generate different perspectives. So the way I do it when I'm coaching is you start out with some logical perspectives just to get those out of the way, and that's even ends up those aren't very helpful. It's like, but then you just do random perspectives, like the perspective of a teapot or of a cloud or of the ocean or of a dog, and
Mm.
you go through a bunch of random perspectives, and you have people kind of say, well, you know, what's the feeling tone that is
Mm.
associated with that perspective? And okay, very briefly, what's an insight you got into the problem? You know, you have them start out with some issue that they're worried about. Try to have them state the issue in a neutral way. What perspective did you get on that issue from this? From what idea did you get about that issue from this perspective? But then you quickly take them to another perspective, and then when you're done, let's say you generate 10 perspectives, 3 kind of logical ones, which and 7 random ones. They'll typically like one of the random ones best, and you say, which one do you want to come from in strategizing about this issue that you have? And this just frees people. It's like amazingly powerful what
Mhm.
this perspective work can do, and it's easy to learn. I mean, you know, compared to getting a PhD, it's nothing to get fully trained in coaching. I mean, this is super easy stuff.
Mm.
Now, look, I'm talking about folks who are capable of being economists, who are really remarkable people.
Mhm.
So I've no doubt that the coaching training would be difficult for some people, but it's you know, for people who can get a PhD in economics, you can do this. Now, you might have to expand your mind and, you know, do something that involves some muscles you haven't strengthened very much in your life,
Right.
but you could. And
What are some of the results that you've observed with economists that you've worked with?
oh well, let me I mean, one thing is, I mean, as a coach, you have strict confidentiality rules, and so
Yeah.
I, you know, and so that hampers somewhat saying. But let me talk about this in the broader context. So I got trained in this, and then there's one more mode of the coactive coaching, which is just helping people be in touch with the feelings they're feeling right at this moment.
Mm.
And the key there is you just focus on the physical sensations that go with the feelings, so you don't overthink them.
Right.
And but then after I'd gotten all the coactive coaching training, there's a kind of enhancement of that that's positive intelligence tricks and approach, which is I like, because what they have, what I do for economists is I offer free for economists a 6-week program of positive intelligence training, which is kind of great, because in a 6-week time you get all the kind of you get a lot of the wisdom of current psychology, including including neuroscience, and one of the things I say in the first week of I say 6-week program, but it's just 1 hour a week for 1 hour, 7 meetings for 1 hour a week, where you get together with so we do it for economists and families. So we'll have nine participants that are economists and often their spouses or significant others. And so it's like typically more than half economists, because you have some single people, and then you have some couples, which are the economist and their spouse or significant other. And then and it's wonderful. My wife Gail and I lead those get-togethers, and there's also an app that goes along with it. But you just learn a lot about it. And the speech I give on the first time is, I say, look, you don't have to believe all of this stuff. If you could find 10% that's useful for you, this is going to be helpful. And I give a guarantee this will make you 1% more productive. And if you think about it, if you have something that takes 1 hour a week for 7 weeks, and then you're doing maybe you're doing maybe 15 minutes a day on an app for 6 weeks, it's not going to take very long to make back your time, even with the 1% improvement in productivity. And so what's the experience there? I mean, this is good stuff. So what we do first is we talk about identifying your saboteurs. So Shirzad Chamine is the guy who invented positive intelligence, which is kind of this pedagogical package of the current state of psychology and neuroscience. And it's so the saboteurs are, we all know them. So the most the saboteur every adult pretty much is aware of is the inner critic. So how many people, you're a very rare person if you don't have that little voice that says, oh, you stupid fool, how could you make that mistake? How could you do that? And so many people have this in the extreme. Well, Shirzad Chamine calls that your judge. So you've got this inner critic, that's judge of self. Well, guess what? Your inner critic also criticizes other people, but it also says, oh no, I got all these unpleasant things on my schedule I've got to do today. Well, that's also a critic of the things you have to do. So you start identifying your saboteurs and noticing that internal voice, and you distance yourself a little bit from it. So it's surprisingly freeing to go from saying I'm a stupid fool to saying, oh, my inner critic says I'm a stupid fool. Right? You've just taken away 2/3 of the punch of that I'm a fool if you say my inner critic says I'm a fool. Just distancing yourself that much, hugely powerful. And so so you kind of identify your saboteurs, but then what we go on to do is to, so the opposite of saboteur, Shirzad Chamine calls the sage. And so you identify different ways of coming at things helpfully. First of all, you've got to get your brain state in the right place. And it's very interesting. I mean, a lot of this is well known. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that's accumulated about mindfulness. The thing that positive intelligence does is it says you can get to mindfulness in 2 minutes or even in 15 seconds. And you don't have to meditate for an hour. I mean, you might want to meditate for an hour to get into a really good place, but what we especially need is we got all kinds of things thrown at us in the middle of every day, and to get back to mindfulness by within a couple of minutes time, that's really useful. And a lot of it is just getting back out of your head into your body, like paying attention to you can touch two fingers against each other and feel them very closely, so that you can even feel the finger ridges, for example, or you can listen to the sounds around you. That your nearest sound is the sound of your own breath. How many of us, how long has it been since you noticed your own breath? But as soon as you pay attention, it's right there. You can hear it.
Right.
But we tune that out. But that can pull you away from a brain state that's pretty unhelpful. If you're super angry, or if you're super ashamed, or super getting down on yourself, just concentrating on bodily sensations can get you to a better brain state. So that's stuff. I mean, that's stuff that the phone app teaches, and that we talk about. And look, the thing that's kind of cool in doing this for economists is we economists are a hard-bitten bunch. So you've got people who are really, really skeptical a lot of times, and they come out thinking it's really, really valuable. And the reason, I mean, I feel like this is something I can do for the world. I mean, economists are the reason it's important to have at least a few economist coaches in the world, is because economists, arrogant creatures that we are, often don't listen to anybody but other economists.
Right, that's true. Yeah.
So it's like, okay, I can do this. I can do this. I can take these things and describe them in a way that's intellectually respectable to us hard-bitten folks. And listen, I can be very, very intellectual and do that. So it's very cool. And then so you learn. So to lay out some of the rest, there's something we talked about religion having good stuff in it, even though there's also bad stuff, right? There's also bad stuff in religion. And by the way, one of the little get-togethers that Shirzad had for us coaches who were doing this, it was very simple. It was on Zoom. He divided people in different religions into different break rooms and had them discuss, and then come back and tell us all. And guess what? Every religion you can name, and there were about 10 different break rooms, so he did have to aggregate some. There's a sage version and there's a saboteur version of that religion. So guess what? Every religion has a dark side without exception, and every religion has a light side without exception. I mean, my least favorite religion is not Mormonism, but even it's really, I'm not going to name them, but even they have some aspect that's really working for people. And I wouldn't ever recommend somebody go there because there's too much bad stuff, but they would only be able to draw people in if they had something good in there. So every religion has a sage side and a saboteur side. But what's in common with all the major religions is for a supernaturalist, it's often said everything happens for a reason. Now, for a non-supernaturalist, the way to say that is, look, you've got something you don't like has happened to you. Okay, you can either, if it's a small thing, you can just accept it. If it's a big thing, you're better advised to try to make some meaning out of it.
Right.
What's the best way? What's the cool thing I can do to make it to mitigate the bad impact? What's something I can learn from this? What's what in order to sort of counterattack against this bad thing, what cool thing can I think up?
Right.
And so it's, you don't have to believe in the supernatural to say that you're going to wind up in a better place if you take the bad stuff that life throws at you and try to make things as good as possible, given that happened, and to feel good about the fact that you are inspired to do something creative, to deal with that bad thing that happened to you. Right? There's always some creative approach to whatever bad thing happened to you, and it may not make, it doesn't mean that it wasn't a bad thing.
Right.
But you can make it less bad, and with smaller things you can make it. When I say that, one of the things that's propelled me to go deeper in terms of personal growth is my wife and I have lost 3 children. So we had we had 2 babies who died in infancy, and then my son Spencer, our son Spencer, committed suicide when he was 20 years old. And so that was really, 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 really tough. And we wouldn't be the people we are today if that hadn't happened. And I don't want it at all go to saying, oh, that made it all worthwhile. It didn't. It didn't. We, in a heartbeat, go back and, change the past if we could. Maybe unwisely so. I think that the Star Trek temporal prime directive is probably pretty wise, but nevertheless, we would foolhardily go back and try to change those things. But it's but what are we supposed to do? Do we want to lay down and say, oh, the rest of our life should be miserable because of that? Or do we want to find, whatever their magnitude, whatever good things it's possible to come out of the deeper deeper dive that we ended up having to do into our own souls because our son died, and the baby's dying wasn't as big, but it was pretty big too. Although I'd have to say, fourth after that, after our three children dying, leaving Mormonism was the hardest thing in my life. Or the disillusionment with Mormonism was the hardest thing in my life, I should say. I guess by the time I was disillusioned, the actual leaving wasn't super hard. But that's a real reorientation of things. Psychologically, my life story is not, I'm this. The first part of my life story is not, I'm this economist. I'm a Mormon and then I lose my faith. That's the first part of my life story, and I'm not saying the career part wasn't an important ancillary piece of that. But even that was in service to being a Mormon. One of the things about Mormonism is that there are polls that say it's a pretty despised religion, actually. Fortunately, people think well of Mormons, and so there's a little bit of a disjunction. People think well of Mormons, but they think ill of Mormonism. And so it's not, I don't want to exaggerate how bad it is, but the fact that the world thinks ill of Mormonism, and I think it's because it is so avowedly supernaturalist,
Yeah.
Basically people are okay with religions that have only a token supernaturalism in them. And of course, I'm a non-supernaturalist now, so it's like, okay, I understand the supernaturalists, but I myself am a non-supernaturalist, so I understand where people are coming from there. But Mormonism is a high-intensity religion, and people are not okay with high-intensity religions. And so, I mean, the folks who aren't in one aren't okay. The folks who are in one are often pretty mean about the other varieties, but Christians will say Mormonism isn't Christian, and I think that's unfair. You have, I mean, Mormonism is a Christian heresy, but it's a Christian heresy. It's not some other kind of heresy. It's a Christian heresy.
Yeah, right.
I mean, so if you want to say, oh, you can't be a heresy and be Christian, that's what they're saying when they say Mormonism isn't Christian. But no, it is a Christian heresy.
Right.
And I have a blog post on the Mormon view of Jesus, which actually has a decent number of page views still. But it's not. We're Bible believers. Here I'm saying we still after all these years, but Mormons are Bible believers. I still identify as a Mormon in many ways, but yeah, leaving Mormonism was tough. It's I mean, church leaders were lying, but I've got to say, in relation to
that was the trigger. That was the trigger that was experiencing some deception.
Yeah, absolutely. So and it was a step worse than that, because the way it's a step worse than that is because it was worse than their lying was that they would harshly punish people who were telling the truth. Okay, so it's like, okay, the total number of direct lies could have been pretty manageable, but it's if you tell the truth, we're going to throw you out of the church. We're going to fire you from Brigham Young University. We're going to bring down the weight of church punishment on you. And for somebody who's a believer, the weight of church punishment can seem pretty big.
It's a pretty big deal. Right? Yeah.
I mean, I think
because it's real. It's a real punishment.
And so the person I'd recommend, if you're interested in this, the person I'd recommend on this is Lavina Fielding Anderson, who's a very sweet woman. But she set out to document ecclesiastical abuses in Mormonism. And I honestly don't think Mormonism is a particularly bad church by any means. I mean, it's a big enough church. You can find all kinds of bad behavior. Right. But the problem, the problem was not that there would be some bad behavior in a church of millions of people. It's that the church leaders wanted to hush up what bad behavior there was. For example, things like that. It's like forthrightly say, of course, yes, there's bad behavior. This is unacceptable. That's the right approach. Now, to admit, as a non-supernaturalist, if you don't really have the supernatural, then I don't know that there's any easy solution, because if you go to the truth of Mormon history, and if, as I believe, the truth of history has to show it's not supernatural, because that's the truth of the world, that things aren't supernatural, how can you be totally open and honest about Mormon history? So I told you one of the great things about Mormonism is because it started in the first half of the 19th century, that it's good with science up to like 1850 or so.
The sun being Right. Like the sun being the
Oh, the
center,
earth
not the
goes
earth.
around the sun
Right.
and so
Right.
on. Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
not putting anybody to death over
Oh,
stuff like that.
1850s science had a lot of physics and everything in it.
Yeah.
So
Right.
remember that's pretty sophisticated science. Unfortunately,
Right.
not Darwin, but pretty sophisticated science. And and Mormonism has no problem with relativity or anything like that. I mean, it's
Hmm.
like that. That's not a big that's not a big religious issue. The but the but that's history. That's there's a lot of documents. There's a lot of documents. I mean, there's still stuff, probably new information you can get about the origins of Mormonism if you work hard enough digging up local newspapers, for example. You, you know, it's like this is it. This is Mormonism is historical in a way that the beginnings of Christianity aren't.
Mm.
And so I don't know. So I'm not
So
saying
what
there's
happened?
any.
So you're at Michigan, you're an assistant professor or
Yeah,
something
well,
like
I was
that. And so what are these like revelations about deception specifically that really
well,
start
so
to
I had a set of friends. So one of the things was I in the wake of our second child dying, I
mm,
you know I was going to a deeper psychological place, and so you know I consciously was seeking out additional friends because I knew I needed that, and the and many of them were doubters.
right,
Many of those friends were doubters. Not all of them, but many of them were doubters. And it's interesting. So we would get together regularly, and at first I went and said, "Oh, I'm gonna be the I'll be well, I just thought the words, I'll be an apostle to the unbelievers. I'll convince them, you know." So it's like, I mean, literally, I went in
yeah,
there thinking, I wanted these friends, but I
hmm,
thought, oh, I'll use my apologetic, I'll be an apologist here,
hmm.
and I
So this
was.
was like a bereavement. This was kind of like a bereavement
This
community,
was
or
a men's group. This was
it
a
was a men's group?
men's
Okay,
group. So I actually belonged to two men's group, a sort of former Mormon men's group and a Unitarian Universalist men's group, and my best friend is in both.
mm,
So because he's one of the people, we actually had like four couples who went from the Mormon church to the Unitarian church at the same time, although we didn't all keep going. But for a year or so, we went, that group of folks went, and we're but so I was being the apologist for Mormonism, and I mean the technical meaning of apologist,
yeah,
defending things rationally, and that went on for 2-3 years. Uh, but it was an environment where it was easy to think very deeply because my friends knew so much about
right,
Mormon history and what the Mormon church was doing and everything like that. And, I, I, and so we could have very well informed debates,
right,
and I knew that, uh, I knew that what they were saying was factually correct. And then it's like, okay, how can you defend the church given the factual correctness of the things my friends were telling me?
right.
And
Which you couldn't deny. You sort of accepted that those
I
things
mean,
were real.
I never thought, I mean, the so-called anti-Mormons are not lying, basically. So it's like one of my friends said, you know, oh, can't remember can't remember the names, but there was this group of folks called the Lighthouse Ministry who were trying to get people out of Mormonism into Christianity. And my friend said, they may not be very deep in what they say, but they can photocopy. Back then when we did photocopying rather than just send around electronic files, it's like, no, I mean,
what are they photocopying? What are they photocopying?
Old Mormon, Mormon documents and stuff. There's stuff that, there's stuff that Brigham Young said in the 19th century that's kind of inconvenient for the Mormon church leaders now. And the internet made them have to admit this to some level, right? The internet made it just too easy to find this stuff. But back in the 90s, what I'm talking about, it was not so easy to find this stuff. And so the church had a policy of trying to play it down and hide it to the extent it was possible to hide it.
And that's what, and that kind of policy was that like one of your first chinks in the armor a little bit?
That didn't bother me so much. It was the fact that when people tried to talk about this stuff and bring them to light, that the Mormon church would punish them. Right. So in other words, if the Mormon church had just lied a little bit and had kept things from people in the sense of having the church curricula not tell people stuff, but they'd allowed folks independently to bring all this stuff to light, that wouldn't have bothered me so much. It was the fact that they immediately sprang to punish people who were trying to bring this stuff to light. That really bothered me.
What does it mean to punish? What does it mean to punish in a voluntary organization like that?
Oh, well, I mean, it's kind of what I said before. So first of all, you've got BYU professors they can fire.
They get fired, right? Okay.
So they can do some of that. So you have a few church universities. You have what's now, BYU Provo, BYU Idaho, what's now called BYU Idaho, and BYU Hawaii. There are folks who work directly for the church in other capacities. But the other thing that they can do is the church folks in the church office building, and sometimes higher than that. But so sometimes it's the direct church leaders making this happen, and occasionally it might be somebody a little lower down than that. But let's say pretty high up, they'll basically send a note to your bishop, or so a bishop is over a congregation and a stake president is over about 10 congregations or something like that. So they'd send a note to your stake president or bishop saying, you should call this person in and call them on the carpet. So that was and then, I mean, remember that you have in your local congregation, you're in a thick relationship. You have a church job, which, let's say you're a Sunday school teacher or something, and maybe they fire you from being Sunday school teacher. And it's not like you got paid for being Sunday school teacher. So this isn't if you didn't directly work for the church in a paying job, which many people do, it's not going to take away your livelihood, but it takes away a role you have in the community. They could say, we don't want you to pray anymore in church, or that's the moment I left the church, was when he said, okay, you can no longer teach any classes, and you can no longer, do things like, I mean, I wouldn't have made a big deal about praying in church, but not being able to teach classes, it's like, I mean, I don't enjoy listening to what everybody else is saying anymore, because I believe very differently. And I thought, and it was still fun for me to teach church classes. So it's like, okay, you're taking away the one thing that I enjoy.
Right.
I confess, I was a little offended by that. So but I'd already started attending the Unitarian Church. I'd go to the Unitarian Church, and then I'd show up at the Mormon Church just to teach a Mormon church class when I had one. But yeah, you're taking away people's roles. You might officially throw someone out of the church. That's called excommunication. you might the other thing the Mormon Church has, this is probably more detail than people want, but there are even apart from hierarchical stuff, there are two levels of membership in the Mormon Church. There's the basic membership. This is not how they describe it, but there's the basic membership, and then there's having a temple recommend. And to be a and so I'm not using the words in the technical way, but if I use them in a non-technical way, there's an important sense in which you have to have a temple recommend to be in good standing. And so in the temple recommend, you actually get asked lots of very personal questions, actually. And I have to say one of the things my dad, of course, was the son of the president of the church, and he ended up having an effect on the temple recommend interviews where they started asking about belief more. Up to that point, they'd mostly asked about behavior. Are you being good? Are you doing what church leaders tell you to? Some combination of being a good person and doing what church leaders tell you to. But then partly because of some of my dad's questions, they added questions about, well, do you believe in God and in Jesus, and implicitly, at least, do you believe in the supernatural? And so you have to. So I couldn't pass that test now, but because of the non-belief in the supernatural. But so you're kind of a second-class citizen if you don't pass the temple recommend interview. And when I said blacks couldn't get the priesthood, they were also barred from the temple.
So regardless of that when was that policy created? At the very beginning?
Oh, it goes back to Brigham Young.
Brigham Young is the Joseph Smith didn't have that policy.
What? Joseph Smith ordained at least one black man, and I think Brigham Young is the source. I mean, I'm not an expert on this part of Mormon history, but I think Joseph Smith simply assumed that you could ordain black men as well as others, and he died before the Civil War, so the fact that there weren't a lot of black men ordained in the time of Joseph Smith isn't terribly surprising in these pre-Civil War days. But then Brigham Young instituted a ban on blacks being ordained to the priesthood. But see, it's a bigger deal even in Mormonism than you might think, because first of all the other men were ordained priests. But second of all, as it is now, there are these two levels of membership in Mormonism, with and without a temple recommend. And you are absolutely a second-class citizen if you don't have a temple recommend. It's not just that you can't attend the temple, it's that you're barred from the higher positions in the hierarchy, for example. Well, I mean, it's not surprising given that you put a lot of effort into evaluating people once a year with a temple recommend, and then you're going to use that for lots of other purposes because you put a lot of effort into gathering some information, and so then it gets used for all kinds of things. And so one of the ways they can fire people from BYU is that I think they have a requirement that to be a professor at BYU, you have to hold the temple recommend.
And the only reason, and that's endogenous, because the only reason you wouldn't have the temple recommend would be some revelation that came up in the meetings. Is that right?
Or if you got a message down from the church hierarchy that this person's been writing stuff we don't like, and so you should pull.
So either the bishop learned something, and says, or somebody outside the bishop learned something, but it's like it's a pretty strong observable signal.
And the Mormon Church not very successfully, tried to have a little deniability. Oh, it's your bishop who did that. It's your stake president that did that. But that was not very successful because it was pretty obvious they were sending notes down, at least strongly hinting to your stake president or bishop, you should probably. No, because they wanted deniability, a stake president who is particularly liberal could protect you for a while. Right. So it wasn't a total nothing that they wanted to say that this decision of pulling your temple recommend is due to the stake president or the bishop. It's stake president for men because they have the priesthood, and the bishop for the women because they don't. But yeah, they sent notes down strongly hinting you should maybe think about taking away this person's temple recommend, and a stake president could not do that if they wanted to, and particularly liberal ones would sometimes, resist the hint, but most of them went along with the hint. So
that was like so experiencing that in the context of that men's group, it was a slow process, it sounds like, but it was the feeling of disillusionment was really painful. I guess even especially after losing Spencer.
No, Spencer was much later. Spencer was
later.
I left Mormonism in the year 2000. I'm an old man. I'm now 62. So I was in the Mormon Church from 1960 to the beginning of when I was born to the beginning of 2000.
I see. Okay.
And my son Spencer didn't die till 2009. So I was saying after our second daughter died in infancy.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it.
Our second death. I mean, that was our fourth child, but second one to die. And so Mary Ann died when I was in graduate school, and I wrote my dissertation after the death of our first child, and I kept soldiering on. I was not as psychologically deep in graduate school as I hope I am now. So I was not grieving as effectively as I could have been. I wasn't as in touch with my emotions as I should have been then. But I tried to grieve and everything, but mostly I just, okay, I'm going to move on. But then I took grieving very seriously after Laura died in trying to remember which year, but it was in the early 90s. And I remember because it's 2 years before our youngest was born, so 1991. So 1991 died, and then it was an interesting period of Mormon church history. So one of the stories that I should tell in relation to Mormonism was this is a story of outside offers I've had. So when I had 2 years, when I got out of when I was on the market before I got my PhD, I had interviews most places, and I did a lot of flyouts, and I got a lot of offers, but I was hoping for offers at a higher rank than I got. I think in Northwestern and Michigan were the highest ranked place. I guess Columbia too, though. I leaned more towards smaller towns than New York at the time. But so those were kind of the highest ranked places that I got job offers. And I got a job offer at BYU at the time too, but didn't take that terribly seriously. But it's like if at that point I had gotten an offer at Princeton, I would have gone there in a heartbeat. But 2 years later, when I did get an offer at Princeton, I decided against going there. Now at the time, being a believing Mormon, I prayed about it. Now as I look back at that, I do think for me, as for many people, I think prayer was a way of getting in touch with my, with my own objective function at a deep level. And so as I interpret it now, that praying helped me get in touch with the wisdom I had somewhere in my brain that I don't think I do well under high pressure. And so I knew I could fairly easily get tenure at Michigan. In fact, at my third year review, the issue was my teaching. They said, "Oh, don't worry about your don't worry about your publications, just worry about your teaching." But I didn't go to Princeton then. I mean, this was an untenured offer, and
Right.
if it was a tenured offer, I would have obviously to me even now I would have gone there. But then as is usual when you're at a place for a long time, your salary falls behind with it's typically only outside offers that keep your salary up to
Market,
in line with the better ones of your colleagues. And so I got a little disgruntled about my salary having fallen behind in the late 90s. And so I got this bright idea, oh, why didn't I go to BYU? And they were very eager. The economics department there was very eager to have me. And there was an economist who is the dean of social sciences, whom I negotiated with directly. And I got what I thought was a pretty good offer at the time, though salaries have kept going up in economics. I mean, at the end of the day, it was not so unusual, but it seemed like a rich offer to them. But I was trying to see if the gain was worth the candle, because I knew I'd have to subject myself to an orthodoxy test.
Yeah.
And I was a fully believing Mormon still at the time. This was in 1997. On the other hand, I'd had all these liberal Mormon influences and so on. So I failed the orthodoxy test at the
you did.
of my actually at the hands of my dad's first cousin, who's a high Mormon official, Hal Eyring, or Henry B. Eyring.
Mm-hmm.
And so I failed the orthodoxy test. I had an interview to test my orthodoxy with the president of Brigham Young University and with Hal Eyring, who's still a high Mormon church official. He's still alive. And this is probably the first time I've told this story publicly. I mean, at the time, I think it was the president of BYU kind of called me to say, "Oh, you're not going to tell this story, are you?" And but it's been enough years. So I said, "Oh no, I wouldn't do that." But it's been enough years. I'm not gonna don't feel bound by that anymore. It's ancient history. I don't know how much they care about it anymore. But anyway, when I was a tenured professor at Michigan, I was rejected for a job at BYU that the economics department dearly wanted to give me because I failed the orthodoxy test.
What do you think was what questions, if you had to look back, do you think you probably failed?
Oh, well, it was my support of the independent Mormon magazine Sunstone. That's what they actually talked about. Now they had a file on me with some other things in it, because but even that was things I'd said in relation to a Sunstone symposium. So I think
What's Sunstone? What is that? What's Sunstone?
Well, Sunstone and Dialogue are the main liberal Mormon magazines. I mean, Sunstone, I guess Dialogue called itself a journal, to be halfway to being an academic journal, but they're liberal Mormon magazine. Sunstone also organizes conferences for intellectual and liberal Mormons.
I see.
And I thought that was a cause worth supporting. So I've got a good name. My grandfather, who was head of the Mormon Church, was Spencer W. Kimball. So I've made a point of using my full name, Miles Spencer Kimball, sometimes at least on economics papers, so that would automatically reference my grandfather if I just continue to use that in any religious context too. But so there were, when it was a print version, there'd be Sunstone magazines printed with Miles Spencer Kimball as one of the, can't remember what I was, but it was like I was on the board. There was no work involved, so I lent my name to it because I thought it was a good thing. And some of my siblings still do to this day. And so they, in the orthodoxy test, they wanted me to speak ill of Sunstone, basically.
Mm.
You
And you
know,
wouldn't do it.
no, and I would, and I, you know, and I wouldn't do that. So, I mean, I don't. It might be that I would have failed the orthodoxy test anyway, given the other things they had in my file. Because the other thing that I'd done was, well, this is my friends and I. We'd organized. The church had gone through a period of throwing many people out of Mormonism. It's called the September 6 in Mormon history.
Oh.
And my friends and I organized a letter that we had 43 signatures on from us and fellow Mormons that expressed concern about this. And I was I was volunteered to put my name first because I was the because I was had the highest ranking relative, although this was after my grandfather had died. And this was beyond the time when I could have talked to my grandfather directly about it because he died. But anyway, my name still meant something. So I was volunteered to put my name first, which I was totally willing to do. So that alone probably made me fail the orthodoxy test. That I because it's not just expressing concern, it's the fact that my friends and I could organize 43 signatures for a letter like that, which is a little scary to the Mormon Church. I mean, they worry about little tiny things. I mean, let me just say they're so concerned about things fraying that they would have thought that was a relatively big deal.
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying that it was a big thing. I'm saying they worry about such small things that to them it was a big deal.
Right. Well, so, I guess like to kind of come to a bit of a conclusion, is there something that you think, to a listener regarding the work that you're doing with the life coaching? Is there something that you would like to just kind of end
Absolutely.
on with that?
Come join us. I mean, so every 7 weeks we start a new pod, just a new group of 9 economists and their spouses or significant others, and you're going to learn a lot in a short time. But and you get to do it in the company with your fellow economists. So
Right.
it's cool stuff. Well, actually, Scott, why don't you talk about your experience with this positive intelligence training?
Well, I did your pod a couple of years ago, and the things that have, the things that I guess in my story, um, I have not had the positive experience of something sticking as long as this. That's for sure. I've tried lots of stuff and been bored by it. For some reason, this positive intelligence thing kind of has been really useful. It's probably because I see a life coach that you introduced me to, Bex. I still see her. That's been a really rewarding relationship. I have been really surprised that that I have the rapport with her, and that the quality of our conversations each time. It's very structured, so but yet real fluid. And I think has really helped me, just think more deeply about um, these basic things like this sage saboteur idea has been really useful. But I do the since then I have I have found that these mindfulness exercises that he calls PQ reps, those have that mindfulness and that meditative work on a daily basis has just been it's been pretty critical, because I think sometimes I really struggle with a lot of things that have gone unchecked for a long, long time, and didn't quite know that they were problematic. Things like, you know, things that are. I had some events. I had a suicide attempt in my family that left me pretty, pretty upset. I had a lot of guilt I felt over it, that I couldn't get rid of. And but I did not know that some of that guilt might have a name that wasn't really positive. That's sort of like um, this idea of being a victim. That was not something that I thought of. I felt like if I moved on from that suicide attempt, that I would be betraying that person. I felt like it was really important. It was moral, ethical. It was unethical for me to move on. And so I really uh, couldn't couldn't do it. And even as a Christian, where you believe in things like God's grace and His forgiveness, I just couldn't accept it. And something about the pod, something about the curriculum, something about probably a lot of it is working with Bex, something about just these basic concepts. There was this personality test that you take, and learning that I scored basically a perfect score on victim was pretty startling. Seeing that victims
I've got a strong victim saboteur too, by the
yeah,
way.
yeah. The interaction between some of these traits are particularly toxic. So like the victim combined with this thing called a pleaser, which is basically pretty manipulative. I'd never thought of a pleaser as being as manipulative as he is, but the pleaser sort of gives gifts in order to get his own needs met by other people rather than just asking for those needs to be met. And so when you put that victim and that pleaser together, I think it's some of my. It's been, and then I think it got me through life, and I don't want it. And so, and then I have other things. So I'm always learning more things about myself. So I recently retook the test and scored very high on restless saboteur.
Hey,
Uh,
can I say a
yeah,
little bit about what I learned from this? So
yeah,
one of the things people learn a lot, even just from doing the saboteur assessment, and you can do that online. I hope we can put like 3 links in here. We can put a
yeah,
link to this saboteur test, which you can do without doing anything more in the
yeah,
program, and you learn something from it. And then 2 links to, I've got a blog post describing the program, and which again I do free for economists. This is like a market value of $1,000, but I'm trained, I can do it free for economists and their families. And then there's testimonials of many economists have done this and have did it. It's been about 150 economists plus their and family who've done it so far. So there are
mm,
quite a few testimonials too. So we'll I hope we put those links up. What
yeah,
I learned from the saboteur assessment, so I've got that victim, which is kind of episodic for me. I've got this hyperachiever,
yeah,
which says, the hyperachiever usually says, "Oh, you didn't get enough done today, or you could, or you're wasting time." That's my hyperachiever. And then there's a hyper rational, which, um, for somebody like me who identifies as an intellectual, that was a little hard at first. to identify. But in fact, it has been a blight on my life, because I grew up having the other, other people thinking, oh, Miles isn't fully human, or talking like that. It's like I once had somebody said, oh, I realized from that interaction I saw that you really do care about people. Okay, great. It's like, okay, so backhand compliment if there ever was one, but I thought I cared about people all along. But anyway, and then the one that was the biggest surprise was the controller saboteur. So it's like, probably obvious to everybody else, but especially on my research teams. But I gotta say, it's helped me enormously with my research teams, just to recognize that I've got a problem with the controller saboteur, and to try to not tightly run the show too much. And so I've got to say, it's just helped enormously with our research team. It's like I'm giving space for the other people to be creative rather than smart too. Doesn't make me be any less creative, and it gives space for them to be creative, and we get to better ideas as a team. And that I really account for, my dealing with my controller saboteur. And hey, everybody I work with that I can convince I have do this positive intelligence program. And actually, I've had a lot of people on research teams I'm with do the positive intelligence program, and some of them get other coaching. So Bex, who is Scott's coach, is somebody we still have a group of coaches who still meet every week to talk about positive intelligence. So I see Bex all the time. But anyway, she's a great coach. Wife is a coach, and so this positive intelligence training, in addition to being hugely valuable in its own right, is we offer along with it a free coaching session, so you can see what that's like. And so some people decide to go further and do some of the one-on-one coaching, but most people do the 6 weeks program, and they find it very valuable. In fact, a lot of people find it so valuable that the pod keeps meeting, even without Gail and me, even after we've gone on to do the next pod. Quite a few of the pods actually found it so valuable that they keep on meeting. But anyway, I hope we'll put some good links on there, but do take a look. And this is something, and I'll put you on the waiting list. I'm hoping along the way to convince folks like Scott to become fully trained economist coaches too, so we can ramp up the speed of doing this positive intelligence training. So Scott has alluded to this a little bit on Twitter, but that coaching training is really cool stuff. And like I said, for anyone who's gotten a PhD, it is a breeze compared to that. It's like a tenth the effort, and you can have really fabulous skills that, believe me, they're skills that come in handy in advising students, for example, that in dealing gracefully with colleagues, in not being miserable yourself. And one of the things, I coach a few people directly. I don't have time to do a lot of one-on-one coaching, so I'm doing it. I'm doing the positive intelligence circle, and then I have a very small set of people I coach. But it's a really cool thing. It's a real privilege to have a ringside seat at someone's life. And I got to say, the coaching relationship makes everybody look good. It makes the coach look good. It makes the person being coached look good, because you get to see people's highest aspirations and what they really care about. I think human values, human desires at the deepest level are really beautiful. As economists, what's the job of economists? Being a coach is the same job as an economist, because economists do have two jobs. One job is understanding how the world works, But the other job of economists, which is a little bit more policy related, is helping people get more of what we want. Well, helping people get more of what they want. That I love the fact that economics is deferential or non-paternalistic to what people want. And coaching is very much deferential and non-paternalistic in the same way. It's like you talk to people about their values, that's identifying what they want and try to help them get more of what they want in their life. And same job as economists. So it's fun. It's fun being an economist coach. And I wish there were more economist coaches in the world. And Scott, you need to do it. The world needs more economist coaches. You could make a big percentage increase in the total number of economist coaches in the world if you make that leap.
I'm definitely interested. I definitely am interested. I definitely am. Well, it's been so nice to learn your story, Miles, and hear just the life journey that you've been on, and the unique perspective that you have on life and career, and the gifts that you've learned from all this, and what you're trying to do with that now through the positive intelligence stuff. I've really enjoyed our getting to become friends. So it's also just nice to get to talk.
It's been fun, Scott.
Yeah.
Gonna see us through. Honey, you need me. Baby, I need